hardcore NASCAR fan like myself has that one race that is so special to them in any way, shape, or form, it's their favorite race ever. Even more fans like myself have a bunch of favorite races. So today on this edition of the Top 10 Countdown, I'm going to do a Top 10 Countdown on my personal favorite NASCAR races of all time. Number 10 is the only race in this countdown not won by a NASCAR dozen member, nor a good guy. The 2011 Advocare 500. This is a pretty special race, and it has a little bit of a backstory. Now, for those who don't know, the 2011 Advocare 500 is the Fall Atlanta race. Here is the backstory. A couple weeks prior, it was a pretty down moment for my family. It began in the middle of August when we lost my grandfather on my dad's side to a brain tumor. A few days after we lost him was the funeral in which I was one of the pallbearers. The day after that came an earthquake that hit my home area on the East Coast. And I exactly remember where I was. I was in the college, doing some of my assignments, felt the ground rumble, wasn't sure what it was. Then it went a little crazy, and everyone just ran out. And at the time, the college I was in the process of getting a third building up, and I thought the crane was falling on us or something. But it turned out it was an earthquake, and I couldn't believe it. Anyway, so basically the school was shut down for the rest of the week. Yay! A few days after that was the hurricane that came by. Now, in the process of this hurricane coming through the East Coast and my home area, we got a phone call out of nowhere, and keep in mind the power was out. It was my grandma on my dad's side, the one who just lost her husband of 60-something years. The trailer that she was in, the roof came off, and she needed some assistance. So sure enough, since we were the only ones that could help, me, my mom, and my dad went to her area, picked her up, and took her back to her place, in the middle of a hurricane, nonetheless. That trip actually went okay, so that was pretty intriguing. And it's one of those decisions I regret to this day. I was so sad and shocked for her. She just lost her husband. Now she's going to lose her house, more than likely, which was basically a single wide trailer. I gave her my room. And it was supposed to be going on for only about 6 months until she gets back on her feet. She still lives here today. Explain that logic. Anyway, the main reason that the 2011 Advocare 500 is involved in this is because my grandfather on my dad's side, his favorite driver of all time is Jeff Gordon. Now, sometime after we're getting everything all straightened and getting everything adjusted so where my grandma could live here, much to my disbenefit, but my generosity always interferes with my life, but me. Anyway, what happened was the rain, if I remember correctly, was pushed back to a Monday. I think that was the case. It's been a while since I've seen the race. But anyway, what ended up happening is that we got to the point where I could watch the race while my dad was working. And Grandma, who obviously is retired, could actually watch the race with me. And what ended up happening is that Jeff Gordon got involved with a pretty intense duel with Jimmy Johnson. Now, back in those days, and I say that because it's not applicable now, the way I see it, if two baddies are racing, you root for the lower level baddie. Which, at that time, was Jeff Gordon, because Jimmy Johnson was higher in ranking in the baddie scale, which means he was more of a bad guy. Obviously, that's not the case now. But anyway, this was a more bigger deal, because this was the first race that Grandma was able to watch since losing her man, Grandpa. And the fact that she and I were able to watch that race together, and her man's man won the race in a very incredible duel, that is the reason that's one of my all-time favorite races. And probably, actually it is, my favorite race won by a baddie. And that is probably my favorite Jeff Gordon moment of all time, because of the personal connection that I felt with that race. Number 9 is kind of a funny one. It's because the ending was so funny, it ended up being one of my favorites. Now, for those who don't know, the remaining 9, actually there's 10 races remaining because one's a tie, but you'll find out why later. All the remaining races are won by members of my NASCAR dozen, which is the 12 drivers that I like the most out of all of them throughout NASCAR history. So you got a 1 in 12 shot of guessing who won each race. And no, not all of these races are won by the top guy. But a lot of them are. But anyway, the number 9 favorite race of all time for me was the 2006 Toyota Tundra 200. Now, since a lot of races in 2006 were the Toyota Tundra 200, I'll specify. The 2006 Nashville Truck Race. It was basically your typical average race, which you thought it was going to be one of the two dominating trucks between Talbotine and Mike Skinner. This is one of the most hilarious things you're ever going to see in NASCAR history. What ended up happening is that on the final restart, Mike Skinner was leading. Talbotine does what we know as the bump and run. There are some drivers you can get away with that. Mike Skinner's not one of them. Not to mention that was with 2 to go. So they make their lap around the track, and now Skinner's behind Bodine. Get to the white flag. They take the white flag. Going in the turn one, I don't know why this happened. Onion. Sticky onion. Talbotine has the brilliant idea to brake check Skinner. And if you watch the footage, you'll see it. And then Skinner, meanwhile, is trying to take Todd out. So they're trying to screw each other and end up screwing each other into the outside groove up against the wall. And Rick Allen doesn't notice it until they change the camera from Mike Skinner. Talbotine's on board to the other side. So, all of a sudden, the battle for third, the lap of 4, ends up being the winning pass. And who ends up getting the win? Johnny Benson. And for those who don't know, and you should know because he's in all of my intros, he's my favorite driver. Now, here's the better part about this. Me and my racing crew, which is me and my 5 buddies, we're all watching this at the same time. And the ending was so unbelievable. When Benson took the checker flag, all anyone in that room was doing was, including the Bodine fan Meredith, who you guys know as C. Natwood, and the Benson fan me. It was that shocking and unbelievable. It's still one of those races that unless you're a Bodine or Skinner fan, it's going to give you a huge chuckle. I recommend you see the ending to it because you're not going to believe it. Even after me describing it. It's one of those funny finishes that ended up being one of my personal favorites. Number 8 is the only, technically, non-official NASCAR race in this countdown. The 2008 All-Star Race. Back a few years back, when NASCAR implemented the fan vote to where a popular driver who's not already qualified for the All-Star Race can get into the All-Star Race if they vote for their favorite, we kind of had a hunch that was going to get nowhere. Well, 2008 proved us wrong. In 2008, the person who won the fan vote was Kasey Kahne, who's a NASCAR Dozen member. And I said, okay, one of my guys got in the race. Pretty nice. And I didn't think anything good was going to come out of it. Boy, was I surprised. Because of the work that Kahne's crew was able to do to help him out, and then Kasey managed to get through the entire field, he ended up winning the entire All-Star race. And if I remember correctly, he was the first person since Michael Waltrip to transfer out of the race and then win the entire thing. Shocking, I know, isn't it? And the popularity associated with Kasey Kahne, one of my guys, shows that people who are cool-looking and awesome in terms of personality can also be a tremendous driver. It was the fans who made Kahne win that race. Now, most of the time you're going to say the pit crew was awesome, the driver was awesome, and this and that, and that. And for this race, the most part, the fans won him that race. And that was pretty intriguing and cool to me. Well, with the Toyota Tundra 200, Mike Skinner was a neutral and Tubadine was a baddie. The two drivers the NASCAR Dozen members stopped were two mega baddies. Now, the race in question, number 7, is the 2009 Carfax 250, the Michigan Nationwide race. Now, here's the scene. Kyle Busch and Brian Vickers, who are 2 of the 6 mega baddies, basically were racing each other for the win. They were trying to crowd each other, trying to side draft thing. Meanwhile, here comes this bright green number 88 car out of nowhere, driven by a future NASCAR Dozen member at the time, Brad Keselowski. And he manages to use his drafting skills to basically outdo Busch and Vickers while Busch and Vickers were messing with each other, which was pretty neat for me. Necessarily for my buddies Meredith and Lunchfish, who like Vickers and Busch respectively. And meanwhile, this is in Keselowski's home track, which is Michigan. So that was pretty cool. And then once we got to the white flag, Keselowski was doing a 3-wide pass for the win. You got Busch and Vickers fighting down here. Keselowski's up here and trying to get a bat on both. And basically what ended up happening is that Keselowski managed to win. And Kyle Busch and Brian Vickers went on the Wham show. I know that some of you are probably not going to like that comment, but when you look back at it, it's actually true. Especially look at Vickers' comment. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was the Kyle Busch show. Jared, you did yourself no favors with that one, because I think Busch thought the same thing of you as well. Anyway, Keselowski got the win, Benson Wolf was saved, and my friends are arguing to death, and I'm just laughing at them. The hilarity behind a future driver associated with my squad and 2 guys I really can't stand racing, screwing each other out of the win, even though they didn't screw each other as much as Bodine or Skinner did. No, don't get any dirty thoughts. I meant trying to wreck each other. Anyway, that was a pretty cool race for me, and that's one of the reasons that that's always going to be a pretty intriguing favorite. When you have a birthday that is symbolic with a particular race weekend, and then multiple favorites finish very high in that event, to the point it's like a sweep. It will always be a favorite to you. And for me, my case is my number 6 favorite race of all time. The 2013 Bank of America 500. That is the fall Charlotte Chase race. What ends up happening is that this race is 2 days before my birthday. Now, the past couple years, my birthday weekend has been a tremendous disaster in terms of all of racing. There have been a couple of occasions, and you'll see what I mean later on, that my birthday was tremendous in terms of my birthday racing weekend. A couple years prior to 2013, it was not. Especially 2011. And if you know who my IndyCar trio is, you know the main reason why 2011 was a huge disaster. But anyway, back to 2013. This race definitely helped out my birthday weekend. Because it was not only 2 days before my birthday, but my top 2 guys in the Cup Series at that time, that's also in the NASCAR dozen, went 1 and 2. Brad Keselowski won, and Casey Kane finished 2nd. As a matter of fact, here is the exact text I sent to my boyfriend. NASCAR dozen 1-2. Yes, yes, yes. Best birthday present from NASCAR in 5 years. Did Dave Byrne just make a Cena reference? And for those who don't believe that's what I actually said, that's actually what I said. We can read it right there. And the reason I said that is because in the post-race interview, when Keselowski was celebrating, Dave Byrne said, "The champ is back." Which is resemblance of John Cena's phrase, "The champ is here," and yeah. That was a nightmare. Don't do that, Dave. Anyway. Basically, this is the first time I've had a sweep involving my NASCAR dozen. And it was a pretty cool event, and it's one of those races I will always cherish. So I thank both Keselowski and Kane for that special race. But that's actually only 3rd place in terms of my favorite birthday weekend adventures. You'll hear about the other 2 later. When your first ever favorite gets his first win with you as a fan of his, it's always a pretty special moment, I believe. And even though for me it took a very long while for that to happen, it did eventually happen in 2001. That's why my number 5 favorite race of all time is the 2001 Pennzoil Freedom 400, which is basically Bill Elliott's first win in 227 races. Now, I know you're probably asking, what about that Gatorade duel race in 2000? It's kind of a funny story, because back then I actually thought he won that race, as in won, like the big one. It was only a Gatorade duel. I did not know that at the time. I was 9. Basically, the pretty intriguing thing about Bill's win at Homestead in 2001 is that a lot of people said that Bill was not able to win anymore. Basically, he went on this long losing streak, most of that being attributed to the fact that he was driving for his own team and it wasn't working out. I attribute that to bad luck, to be honest, because if you see the curse of the full-time McDonald's drivers, and there's only 4 of them, McMurray does not count, and neither does anyone after Andy Houston. So basically, you'll know about the McDonnelly curse to a certain extent. Anyway, as for Bill Elliott's win, I remember watching this on this little white TV that I had when I just turned 10 the month prior, so yeah. And Bill was battling his teammate, Casey Atwood, for the win. And that's one of Meredith's other guys, Atwood. So basically, he was battling Edward for the win. Got by with 5 to go, and everyone got excited in the entire household. Stuff on the camera, that's nice. Anyway, what ends up going on is that after Waltrip managed to get past Atwood for second, Bill still wins the race, and everyone goes crazy. It's one of those awesome events in NASCAR history. Arguably, depending on your point of view, either the second, third, or fourth best race of 2001. Because everyone's going to say the spring Atlanta race is the number one race. Now, depending on your perspective for the Homestead race and the 2 Talladega races, you can sort out your little order there. But for me personally, that's the number one race. A, because I'm not big with Harvick or Gordon, and B, Bill's been one of my guys since the very beginning. Now, granted, the main reason at the time was because he was sponsored by McDonald's. But I eventually grew to like Bill for stuff outside of McDonald's, as well as other drivers associated with McDonald's at the time, mainly the drag racers. And basically, the cool thing involving Bill's win, it basically offset a pretty crazy thing that happened in the middle of the race, where Ward Burton's car and Casey Atwood's car made contact, and it drove Ward's car into Ricky Red's pit crew. The footage is on YouTube somewhere, I'm positive. And it basically injured a few crew members. And basically, the intriguing thing is that Bill's win managed to take our minds off that horrible incident. And it was a very enjoyable experience that turned what could have been a very weird and bad day into a very cool and awesome day. No pun intended. The funny thing is, when I previewed this countdown to my boyfriend, he thought that this race would be number 1. It's only number 4. And if you know me in my NASCAR dozen, you probably know which race this is. Number 4 is the 2002 Top Secret Microwave 400. Johnny Benson's only Cup win. Now, this was the middle of the Roush Racing domination factor, and this is a pretty good trivia question when you think about it. What happened was that the last 5 races of the season, 4 of the races were won by Roush guys. In the 5th race, the highest finishing Roush car was 2nd, which was Mark Martin, by the way. Who was the one who stopped the Roush streak? Or prevented a 5 straight Roush streak? The answer is Johnny Benson. So, that's a pretty good NASCAR trivia you can show off to your friends and Roush haters. Anyway, 2002 was actually not that much of a good year for Johnny. He got spun out a bunch of times, almost got injured at Talladega when the car caught fire after the big one. And if you've seen that particular incident, it was definitely very scary, especially for someone who was 11 years old, like me. And then the infamous Richmond race, which everyone swears is the reason I hate Brian Vickers, even though I showed evidence to the contrary. Anyway, Johnny got injured when Brian Vickers got into him, and that was a race I went to, so that wasn't a good thing. After a turn at Pocono the first time, he ended up getting injured at Daytona by Mikey. And weirdly enough, it was different ribs, and I have an interview to prove this. And if you want to see the evidence, I'll just tape it on my camera and then show you the interview. And another intriguing thing that ended up happening is that Johnny should have won the New Hampshire race in the fall, but basically got screwed by, if I remember correctly, the 14 car was Mike Wallace, and then Ryan Newman won the race, so yeah. Thank God it wasn't on Fox, or Mike Joy would go nuts. But anyway, it ultimately led up to the Martinsville race, which was the one near my birthday weekend, and I was hoping that Johnny would do something to stop Kurt Busch from winning, because that's when Kurt Busch was transitioning into the ultimate mega baddie that he was for most of the early to mid 2000s. And Johnny just would not do it, and I was kind of disappointed in that. Of course, that was less than a year after Johnny became one of my guys, when I started getting interest in him, and I eventually learned that his style is the right style. But anyway, a few weeks later, we came to Rockingham, which is Johnny's best track. And I remember this. It was so amazing. I was basically in the kitchen hallway, pacing back and forth. I couldn't watch the race because I was so nervous about this thing. Yes, even as an 11... Wait a minute, 2002. I was 12 at that point. I was 11 when I went to the Richmond race. And then less than a month after I turned 12. Basically, I was going back and forth because what ended up happening, it was a fuel mileage race, and I hate fuel mileage races because they're so, and virtually nothing ever goes right with those races. Because I thought that Johnny's luck would strike him again, and he'd run out of fuel, and probably Mark Martin as well, and then Kurt Busch would take the win. I was kind of expecting that to happen, and then I think it was coming to the white, Kenny Schrader, who was Benson's teammate, ran out of fuel. And Benny makes mention that I get more nervous. And then Alan Bestwick makes his famous call.
Martin diving down low. One final charge off the last corner. It's not going to be enough. Johnny Benson is a NASCAR Winston Cup winner.
And when Johnny crossed the start-finish line, basically everyone in the house knew what happened. Let's put it that way. I start going bonkers. I run to my mom's bedroom where my dad's laying down, watching the race, and I basically go hug wild on him because he was the nearest person I could find. Oh, that was definitely a thrill. And if you're a fan of Johnny's, it was definitely a thrill for you guys as well, I'm sure. That was definitely the highlight for a very crazy year for JB. But that's not actually my favorite race won by him. You'll find out what that is later. Okay, here's the tie that I was talking about. Number 3 is a tie because it was 2 races on the same weekend during my birthday weekend. One of them on my birthday. And both races were won by NASCAR dozen members. Number 3 is the 2006 Dollar General 300 and Bank of America 500, the Fall Charlotte weekend. Now, here is the premise. The day before my birthday was the day of the Dollar General 300, which was back then it was the Busch race. So that was a pretty cool deal. And what ends up happening is that, it's kind of a funny story, a perfectly timed caution gets the eventual race winner back on the lead lap. And he eventually gets up to 3rd, he eventually gets back up to 3rd, and I thought he was not going to catch the top 2 guys, who was Carl Edwards and Casey Mears, and I was kind of hoping that Mears was able to do something to take Edwards out, because my trust with Edwards was at the time. But what ends up happening, Mears tries to pass Edwards on the outside, and Mears got loose, collected Edwards, they both crashed. Now, it's between one of my guys and Matt Kenseth. Oh, great. I thought it would not work. And eventually we had the green-white checkered. And I remember this correctly. Bill Weber said there was a car smoking on the backstretch. And I thought that would, stupid me, I thought it would end the race. Because I was so nervous about that. I said, throw the caution now! Yeah, right. What ends up happening was one of the most amazing things that's ever happened. They get to the white flag, the race is now official. Kenseth had the lead. So, oh great, this is not going to work. And I was so nervous about it because this is one of my guys who had never won a race in NASCAR up to that point. So many tries and so many years in NASCAR, he never won a race in NASCAR until this night. What ended up happening is that going to the third and fourth corner, Kenseth, who's on the bottom side, got loose off the corner, and then the other driver, who is Dave Blaney, won the race. And I had to be quiet because most of my folks were in bed. So I had to celebrate quietly. Meanwhile, I'm jumping all over the house. That was pretty cool. And that's what started the awesomeness, which was my 2006 birthday weekend. Which is weird because next to nothing went right in 2006. If you know me for game shows, and you know what my favorite game show is and who my favorite game show host is, you'd probably know why. But anyway, the other race, the Big of America 500, completed the sweep. That was the Cup race on my birthday, and it was won by Casey Kane. So the Blaney and Kane sweep for the Fall Charlotte weekend, and the sweep was complete on my birthday. That is definitely a treasured memory for me. But it's actually not my favorite birthday weekend race of all time. You'll find out what it is later in the movie. I'm saying that a lot. I should be giving you some hints. Whenever any of your favorites wins at an historic racetrack, and it is a duel, and it's between a NASCAR legend you like and another fellow NASCAR legend, everything is magic. And for me, that's what this race was all about. My number 2 favorite race of all time is the 2002 Brickyard 400. Bill Elliott wins Indy against Rusty Wallace. Now, no offense to the France family, but Daytona has nothing on Indianapolis in any way, shape, or form. It's the Brickyard. It's one of the most historic racetracks ever. And nothing that ever happens at Daytona will top Indianapolis. Ever. In fact, I make the argument that the Coke 600 is the biggest race of the year for NASCAR, not the Daytona 500. Not just because it's the longest either. That's another thing for another time, though. But back to the 2002 Brickyard 400. The funny part about this is that we were in a trend that whoever won the Brickyard would win the championship. I think this was 3 years, 3 years running. So I was kind of hopeful that something awesome could happen. Especially after last year's disaster, one of my guys finished last after getting wrecked. So I was kind of hoping that I would see something cool and extraordinary. And it ended up being that way. It ended up being an incredible duel between Bill Elliott and Rusty Wallace, 2 popular legends of the sport, even during their time of racing. It was so awesome and so cool. Elliott managed to pass Rusty for the win, and they managed to win the race. That is one of the most awesome events ever. Now, granted, I was not alive when Bill won the Daytona 500, so I cannot clarify that as a favorite race for me personally. And even if I was alive, I think the Brickyard would be bigger because, A, no one thought anyone associated with NASCAR could ever race at the Brickyard, and now it's accepted there. And B, it's pretty intriguing when you see your first favorite win at an historic place like Indianapolis. And to this day, he's still the only NASCAR Dust member to win the Brickyard 400. And that's some amazing history for me. But there is one race that is so personal, so unbelievable, and so season-changing. There's a lot of things you can say about this last race, but for me, it was near perfection. There's only one slight thing I would have changed about it. Now let's find out what this overhyped race is. This is a race that occurred 4 days after my birthday. This was season-changing for all of the main parties. For me, it was also a little bit of payback for something that happened earlier in the season. And to me, it is the ultimate defining race of that series championship. My favorite race of all time is the 2008 Kroger 200, the Fall Martinsville Truck Race. Here's the scene. The prior race, which was the Talladega race, there was a close points duel between Johnny Benson and Ron Hornaday. After that race, Hornaday took the points lead and looked like he was going to run away with it. Because NASCAR, a few weeks back before New Hampshire after Bristol, made a rule change reducing Toyota's horsepower. And a lot of people are convinced it was to try and screw Benson out of the title, give Chevrolet, which is Hornaday's manufacturer at this season, a major advantage. And it looked like it was headed that way. It did. But their plan backfired with the Fall Martinsville Truck Race. This was the race 4 days after my birthday. It was at Martinsville, which is, Truck Series-wise, my home track. Because they don't race at Richmond anymore. God knows why. Anyway, what ends up happening is towards the end of the race, it starts becoming a fuel mileage race. Now, on the most recent pit stop, somewhere close to halfway, if I'm not mistaken, most of the drivers took fuel only or 2 tires. Of course, Johnny's crew took 4 tires. I'm going, why did you do that? And Johnny managed to take the lead against him. Now, we were coming to it was close to Greenwich Checker, not quite. I think it was a 4-lap dash to the start-finish line. Yeah, 4-lap dash. No, 5-lap dash, because it was, a 5-lap dash. Johnny's leading. Ron Hornaday, the restart master, is second, so you thought something crazy was going to happen. It kind of didn't, until they completed 1 lap. Now, keep in mind this was a fuel mileage race, and everyone had to save fuel. Hornaday did not save enough. He ran out of fuel with 4 to go. And I was excited at this point when my little buddy, who's a Hornaday fan named Mara, was kind of mortified about it. That was her look. But anyway, what ends up happening in terms of this event, makes an extra lap. Hornaday, who tried to wiggle the truck back and forth to get back to pit road, doesn't make it. And the only reason NASCAR never threw the caution is because they were banking on Benson running out of fuel. Boy, did that plan backfire. When the white flag was waved and Benson took the white flag, Kevin Harvick, who was running second, also ran out of fuel. So he was slowing up. The second place person then became Dennis Setzer. Now, here's the reason I said this was a payback race. For those of you who know the 2008 season as well as I do, the spring Martinsville truck race was going to be a Dennis Setzer, Johnny Benson 1-2 finish until Kyle Busch virtually screwed everything up by taking out Benson for no reason. Luckily, Crafton got Busch for that and took Busch out, so Benson could still beat him even though he finished 25th. But anyway, back to the fall Martinsville race. Harvick running out of fuel gave Dennis Setzer second. Now, for those who do not know, one of the things that I had hoped to see after the death of Bobby Hamilton Sr. is Johnny Benson in one of the BHR trucks, Bobby Hamilton Racing trucks, finish 1-2, regardless of order. I didn't quite get it because of Kyle Busch in the first Martinsville race in 2008, but I got it in the second. Johnny won the race, and Dennis Setzer finished second, and Setzer was one of my backup guys for a long while. The NASCAR doesn't backup squad, which is drivers I like. That's not a NASCAR doesn't member nor a Next Generation thing, but that's for a later thing. Anyway, Harvick ran out of fuel. Hornaday, to my knowledge, if I remember this correctly, finished fourth to last, which is intriguing because for my birthday, I wish to see Johnny win the race and Hornaday finish in the back of the pack, but not because of a wreck to not cause controversy. That's exactly what happened. And that was one of the most awesome things that ever happened. I can still remember when Johnny took the checkered flag, I remember saying, "Happy birthday to me!" It was a very cherished race for me. To me, the turning point of the NASCAR season, probably the main reason Ron Hornaday did not win the championship that year and Johnny did. And the intriguing thing is that if you also know NASCAR history pretty well, you will also know that this was actually Johnny's last win in NASCAR, which is kind of sad, but that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, even though I think he might have won Kansas in 2009, not for the rain coming and screwing that plan up. But anyway, the only thing that would have made this race any better. You see, in that race, Johnny's truck was actually unsponsored. Toyota Certified Used Vehicles nor Exide signed up to sponsor Johnny for that race. So basically, it was a blank red truck. For me, the only thing that would have made that race perfect is if someone would have written on the hood, "Happy Birthday, Mary," because that would have just covered it right there. If you had all that stuff happen and then Johnny's truck and the hood says "Happy Birthday, Mary," that would have been the total perfect race for me. For me, this is the closest race to perfection you are going to get. Your favorite driver wins, his championship competitor finishes way back in the back because of fuel, so no controversy over crashes. A driver racing for a team who recently lost their owner at their new adopted home track, because before BHR shut down, they located to Martinsville. It's your home area. Basically, that is the closest race to a perfect race I'm ever going to see, because you're never going to see another one like that. And that's a very special race to me. So what's your favorite race of all time? Do you have any cool stories about races like this? Do you have one similar to a perfect race like mine with the 2008 Kroger 200? Let me know in the comments sector, and tell me what you think about the races that I listed as my top 10 favorite races in NASCAR history. This is Ultimate23Dragon, and Benson. That's our final answer.
Keselowski's going to get the momentum off forward, guys. And that's going to win him the race right there at the drag race down the line. And then Keselowski's going to win it. 2 tires. How about that move? Wow.